The lights died without warning, and Station Valenine fell into darkness. Marcus Cole was halfway through his night shift when the emergency alarm screamed to life. Their red glow painting the metal corridors in shades of blood and shadow. He grabbed his toolkit and started running, his boots echoing against the floor as the station shuddered around him. All personnel, remain calm. The automated voice announced that there was nothing calm about the way the temperature was. Already dropping, Marcus could see his breath forming small clouds in the air. And he knew that meant the heating systems had failed along with the main power. He was a human, one of only 3 on this remote research station at the edge of known space, and his body could handle the cold far better than most species here, but others could not. The emergency bulkheads slammed down behind him with a thunderous crash, sealing him inside Sector 7 with no way back to the main station. He cursed under his breath and looked around the maintenance corridor, searching for any way to restore power or at least find other survivors. That was when he heard it. Faint tapping sound coming from the wall to his left. Tap. 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 A pause. Tap. Tap. It was a distress signal, the universal pattern taught to every crew member during basic training. Someone was trapped on the other side, and they needed help. Marcus pressed his ear against the cold metal and shouted, "Can you hear me?" The tapping stopped for a moment, then came back faster. More desperate, he examined the wall and found a maintenance vent near the floor, its cover held in place by 4 heavy bolts. His fingers were already growing numb from the cold, but he pulled out his tools and started working. The first bolt came free after what felt like an eternity. Then the second. His hands were shaking now, and not just from the temperature. The third bolt was stuck, rusted in place from years of neglect. Marcus gritted his teeth and put all his strength into the wrench until the bolt finally gave way with a shriek of metal. The fourth bolt was easier, and he ripped the vent cover off and tossed it aside. The passage beyond was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for his shoulders. He grabbed a small flashlight from his belt and crawled inside, the metal scraping against his back as he pushed forward. The tunnel twisted and turned, but he followed the direction of the tapping until he reached another vent cover on the opposite end. He kicked it open and tumbled out into a laboratory, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and there she was, dear Sitha. Valkyrie lay curled on the floor near a fallen desk, her reptilian body trembling violently as frost began to form on her pale gray scales. Marcus had seen her around the station before, a Thorani scientist known for her brilliant mind and her sharp tongue. She had never spoken to him directly, but he had heard her comments about humans in the commissary, calling them soft and weak and unworthy of respect. None of that mattered now. Her golden eyes were half closed, glazed with pain and fear, and when she saw him approaching, she reached out with a shaking hand. "Please," she whispered, her voice so faint he could barely hear it. "I am freezing." Marcus dropped to his knees beside her and pressed his hand against her scales. She was ice cold, colder than the floor beneath them, and he knew from his xenobiology training that Thorani could not survive temperatures below 5 degrees. They came from a desert world where the sun blazed hot and bright, and their bodies had never evolved to the ability to generate their own heat. If he did not act fast, she would die. He stripped off his thermal jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders. But it was not enough. The fabric could only trap heat that was already there, and she had none left to give. There was only one option. Marcus pulled her against his chest and wrapped his arms around her trembling body. She gasped at the contact, her cold fingers clutching at his shirt as if he were the last solid thing in a universe gone dark. "Hold on," he told her, reaching for the emergency thermal blanket in his kite, unfolded the silver sheet and wrapped it around both of them, creating a small cocoon of shared warmth. Her sails were so cold they burned against his skin, but he did not let go. He could not let go. "You are so warm," Sitha breathed, pressing closer to him with desperate need. "How are you so warm?" "Humans run hot," Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady even as she shivered against him. About 37 degrees all the time, no matter what. She made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Her face buried against his neck. "Impossible," she whispered. "You are impossible." The minutes crawled by like hours, and Marcus held her through all of them. He talked to keep her conscious, telling her stories about Earth and its many climates, the scorching deserts of the Sahara, where her people would feel right at home, the warm beaches where the sun kissed the water and turned it to gold, the hot springs where steam rose into cold mountain air. She listened with her eyes closed, her breathing slowly growing steadier as the warmth from his body seeped into hers. "Stay awake," he said, whenever her grip on him started to loosen. "Tell me about your world." And she did, her voice growing stronger as she described endless red sands and twin suns that never set, cities of glass that glittered like jewels in warm winds that sang through ancient canyons. They talked through the longest night of their lives. Two strangers holding each other against the cold dark of space. When the rescue crews finally cut through the sealed doors 6 hours later, they found Scytha wrapped around Marcus like he was the only source of light in the universe. She was asleep at last, her color returning, her body warm and alive, but even in her sleep, she would not let him go. Her fingers stayed locked in his shirt, and when the medics tried to separate them, she made a sound of such distress that they stopped and looked at Marcus with confusion in their eyes. "Just take us both," Marcus said quietly, too tired to explain, and so they did, carrying the human and the Theranid to the medical bay, still tangled together, still sharing warmth, still holding on. Neither of them knew it yet, but something had changed in those dark, cold hours, something that could never be undone. Scytha woke in the medical bay, with warmth still wrapped around her like a blanket she never wanted to remove for a moment. She did not know where she was or what had happened. But then the memories came flooding back, the darkness, the cold, the terrible feeling of her body shutting down piece by piece, and then him, the human. She turned her head and found Marcus Cole sleeping in a chair beside her bed, his head tilted at an uncomfortable angle against the wall. Someone had given him a fresh shirt to replace the one she had torn with her desperate grip, and there were dark circles under his eyes that spoke of exhaustion. Beyond measure, he had stayed with her even after the rescue crews had arrived, even after the doctors had declared her stable. He had stayed. Scytha did not know what to do with that information among her people. Such devotion was not given lightly, and it was certainly not given to strangers from species you barely knew. She tried to sit up, and the small sound she made was enough to wake him. His eyes opened immediately, alert and worried, and he leaned forward with concern written across his strange, soft face. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Warm," Scytha said, and the word came out sounding like something holy. Marcus smiled, and she noticed for the first time that his eyes were the color of the soil on her homeworld, after rain-rich brown with flecks of gold. "That is good," he said. "The doctor said you will make a full recovery, but you need to rest for a few more days." She nodded slowly, her gaze never leaving his face. "You saved my life," she said. "Anyone would have done the same thing." Marcus replied with a shrug that seemed too casual for what had passed between them. But Scytha knew that was not true. She had worked on stations with dozens of different species for nearly 10 years, and she had seen how they reacted to emergencies. Most species thought of themselves first. It was simply nature. Simply survival. Humans were different. She had heard stories about them before she ever met one in person. Tales that seemed too strange to believe. They said humans would run into burning buildings to save strangers. They said humans would give their own food to hungry children of other species. They said humans carried heat inside their bodies like living furnaces and shared it without thinking, without hesitation, without asking for anything in return. Scytha had dismissed these stories as exaggeration, as propaganda designed to make the newcomers to the galactic stage seem more impressive than they really were. But now she knew the truth. Marcus Cole had crawled through a freezing maintenance tunnel, wrapped his own body around a woman who had never shown him anything but contempt, and held her through the longest night of her life. He had given her his warmth when she had none, and he had asked for nothing. Why? She asked him, her voice cracking on the single word. Marcus looked at her with confusion in his brown gold eyes. Why what? Why did you save me? Sci-Fi demanded. I have never been kind to you. I have called your species weak and soft, and undeserving of your place among the stars. So why did you risk yourself for me? He was quiet for a long moment, and she watched emotions flicker across his face like shadows in firelight. Because you were cold, he finally said, as if that explained everything, and perhaps to him. It did. Sci-Fi felt something crack open inside her chest, something she had kept locked away for so very long. Humans are strange creatures, she whispered. So I have been told, Marcus said with that gentle smile that made her feel warm in ways that had nothing to do with temperature. The next few days passed slowly in the medical bay. Marcus visited her every day, bringing her warm drinks and data pads loaded with entertainment and stories about Earth that made her laugh and cry in equal measure. He told her about forests so green they looked fake, about oceans so vast you could sail for weeks without seeing land, about mountains that touched the clouds and rivers that carved their way through solid stone. He told her about winter and snow, about how humans had learned to survive the cold through fire and fur and the simple act of holding each other close. We evolved as social creatures, he explained one evening while she sipped hot tea. Our ancestors huddled together in caves during ice ages that lasted thousands of years. And we learned that warmth shared is warmth doubled. Sci-Fi listened with her heart pounding in her chest with irony. There were ancient memories passed down through generations, memories of the time before the twin suns grew hot, when their world was cooler and their ancestors had to gather together in great piles to survive the night. It was considered the most intimate of bonds. That sharing of heat between bodies. Parents did it with childermates, did it with each other, and now Marcus had done it with Hirsch. She did not tell him what it meant. She did not know how to explain that in saving her life. He had triggered something deep and primal in her biology, something her conscious mind had no power to control, but she felt it, growing stronger every day. Need to be near him, the chill that crept into her bones whenever he left the room, the way her eyes followed him without her permission, seeking his warmth like a flower seeking the sun. When the doctors finally released her from the medical bay, Sci-Fi returned to her quarters and tried to pretend that everything was normal. She went back to her research and her experiments and her careful scientific routines, but nothing was normal anymore. She found herself walking past the environmental systems office where Marcus worked, her feet carrying her there without conscious thought. She found herself eating in the commissary at the exact times she knew he would be there. She found herself lying awake at night, remembering the feel of his arms around her and the steady beat of his heart against her ear. And she was cold, always cold, even with the heaters in her room turned up to maximum, even with thermal blankets piled on her bed. She could not get warm. Something inside her had changed that night in the frozen laboratory, and she was beginning to fear that it could never be changed back. Marcus had given her his fire, and now nothing else would ever be enough. She was bonded to him in ways she could not explain and did not want to accept. And the worst part was that he had no idea what he had done. 3 weeks had passed since the night that changed everything, and Sci-Fi was falling apart. She stood in front of her mirror and stared at her reflection with growing horror. Her scales, once bright and shimmering with health, had faded to a dull gray that spoke of sickness and despair. The golden color around her eyes had dimmed until it looked almost brown. She had lost weight because food held no interest for her anymore. Sleep came only in short bursts filled with dreams of warmth and arms around her and a voice telling her stories about a world she had never seen. She was dying slowly, and she knew exactly why. The bond among her people, it was called the Velthara, the soul binding, and it was supposed to happen only between Thyrany, who had chosen each other through careful courtship and mutual agreement. It was not supposed to happen like this. It was not supposed to happen with an alien who did not even know what he had. Dinasitha had tried everything she could think of to break the connection. She had meditated for hours, using techniques passed down through her family for generations. She had taken supplements designed to balance her hormones and calm her biological responses. She had even consulted the station's medical database in secret, searching for any cure or treatment that might help her. There was nothing. The Velthar was not a disease to be cured or a condition to be treated. It was a fundamental rewiring of her neural pathways, a change as permanent as the color of her scales or the shape of her bones. Her body had recognized Marcus as her bondmate, and no amount of willpower or medicine could convince it otherwise. The only solution was to stay away from him, to let time and distance slowly dull the ache until she could function normally again. But that was proving impossible. Every time she saw him in the corridors, her feet wanted to carry her toward him. Every time she heard his voice in a crowded room, her heart beat faster and her scales flushed with warmth. Every time he smiled at her from across the commissary, she felt like she was standing in the light of twin suns. So she stopped going to the commissary when he was there. She started taking different routes through the station to avoid the environmental systems office. She pretended to be too busy with her research to respond to his messages, asking if she wanted to share a meal. It was agony. The cold grew worse with every day. She stayed away from him until she was wearing 3 layers of clothing and still shivering in rooms that everyone else found comfortable. The other Thyrany on the station began to notice. There were 5 of them, including Sitha, and they had formed a small community within the larger crew, gathering together for meals and cultural celebrations and the simple comfort of being among their own kin. Vilmyron was the first to say something. He was an older male who worked in the biology department, and he had known Sitha's family back on their homeworld. "You have the look of one who is bonded," he said quietly one evening when they were alone in the observation lounge. "But you are not paired with anyone that I know of." Sitha felt her scales flush with shame. "It is not what you think," she said quickly. "Then tell me what it is." Vilmyron replied with gentle patience. "Because what I see is a young woman wasting away from bond sickness, and I am worried for you." The words spilled out of her before she could stop them. The accident, the cold, the human who had pulled her close and kept her alive through the night. Vilmyron listened without interruption, his expression growing more troubled with every word. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. "This is a serious matter," he finally said. "The Volthara with an outsider is rare, but not unheard of. And in ancient times, it was considered a great gift from the ancestors." "A gift?" Sitha laughed bitterly. "It feels like a curse, only because you are fighting it," Vilmyron said. "The bond seeks completion, and you are denying it what it needs." "What it needs is impossible," Sitha replied. "He is human. He does not even understand what happened between us. And even if I explained it, he would think I was insane." "Are you certain of that?" Sitha looked at the old male with confusion. "Humans are strange creatures," Vilmyron continued. "They form bonds with everything, with each other, with other species, with animals and plants, and even machines. And they do not require the biological imperative that drives us." He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "They bond with their hearts, not their blood. And from what you have told me, this Marcus chose to save you when he did not have to. So perhaps his heart has already made its choice." Sitha wanted to believe him, but fear held her frozen in place. What if she was wrong? What if she told Marcus everything and he looked at her with pity or disgust? What if he rejected her and she had to spend the rest of her life on this station, watching him from a distance, cold and alone and broken? "I cannot," she whispered. "I am not brave enough." Bummeran sighed with the weight of someone who had seen too many young people suffer needlessly. "Then I hope you find your courage soon," he said. "Because bond sickness is not something you can survive forever. And I do not want to watch you fade away." He left her alone with her thoughts. And Sitha sat in the observation lounge staring at the stars until her eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. The next morning, Marcus found her in the corridor. Outside the research lab. "Sitha," he called out. And the sound of her name in his voice made her whole body ache with longing. "I have been trying to reach you for days. Is everything okay?" She could not look at him. "I am fine," she lied. "Just busy with work." "You do not look fine," Marcus said, stepping closer with concern in his warm brown eyes. "You look sick, and I am worried about you." "You should not worry about me," Sitha said, backing away from him even as every cell in her body screamed at her to move closer. "I am not your responsibility." She saw the hurt flash across his face before he could hide it, and it felt like a knife in her chest. "I thought we were friends," he said quietly. Friends, such a small word for humans. And yet they used it so freely. Sitha's people did not have friends. They had family and bondmates and acquaintances, and nothing in between. "I have to go," she said. And she turned and fled before he could see the tears finally breaking free behind her. Marcus stood alone in the corridor with questions he did not know how to ask and answers he was not sure he wanted to hear. Marcus could not stop thinking about the look in Sitha's eyes when she ran away from him. It had been 3 days since that moment in the corridor, and he had replayed it in his mind 1,000 times. There had been fear in her golden gaze. Yes, but there had been something else too, something that looked almost like pain, like longing, like need. He did not understand what was happening. After the accident, they had grown close. Or at least he thought they had. She had listened to his stories with such intensity, and she had shared pieces of her own world with him in return. And when she smiled at him, he felt like the luckiest man in the galaxy. Then suddenly she was gone. She stopped answering his messages and avoided the places where they used to meet and flinched away whenever he came too close. The other humans on the station told him to let it go. Irony complicated, his friend Elena said. Maybe she just needs space to process what happened. But Marcus knew in his gut that something was wrong. He had seen sick people before, and Sitha looked sick. Her scales had lost their shine, and her movements had become slow and tired, and there was a hollow look in her eyes that scared him more than the cold dark of that terrible night. He could not let it go. He could not let her go, so he waited outside her quarters one evening when he knew she would be returning from her shift, positioning himself so she could not slip past without seeing him. When she came around the corner and spotted him, she froze like prey caught in the open. "We need to talk," Marcus said gently. "Please." Sitha's hands were trembling at her sides, and he could see the internal war playing out across her features. "There is nothing to talk about," she said, but her voice cracked on the words. "Then why are you crying?" She lifted a hand to her face and seemed surprised to find it wet with tears. "Thyrene, do not cry," she whispered. But the evidence was streaming down her pale scales. Marcus took a step toward her, and she took a step back. "Please do not," she begged. "Please do not come closer." "Tell me why," he said, stopping where he was. "Tell me what I did wrong. Tell me how to fix it. Because I cannot stand watching you suffer like this." "You did nothing wrong," Sitha burst out. "That is the problem. You did everything right. You saved my life and held me through the night and gave me your warmth like it was nothing. And now I am broken because of it." Marcus stared at her with confusion. "I do not understand." Sitha laughed. And it was a terrible sound filled with despair. Of course, you do not understand. How could you? You are human, and your people bond with everyone and everything like it is the easiest thing in the universe. She wrapped her arms around herself and shivered, even though the corridor was warm. But my people are different. Marcus, we do not give ourselves lightly. And what you did that night, what we shared, it meant something to my biology that I cannot undo. The pieces began to fall into place in Marcus's mind. The body heat, he said slowly. Sharing warmth through the night, it was not just survival for you. No, Sitha confirmed miserably. Among my people it is called the Velthara, the soul binding. And it is the most sacred bond that can exist between two Thyrani. She finally looked at him, and her golden eyes were filled with anguish. My body has decided that you are my bondmate, Marcus, and it does not care that you did not choose this. It does not care that you are human. It only knows that you saved me and held me and kept me warm. And now nothing else will ever be enough. The silence stretched between them like the empty space between stars. Is that why you have been avoiding me? Marcus asked quietly. Yes, Sitha admitted. I thought that if I stayed away, the bond might fade, that I could will myself to break free of it. But instead, it is killing me slowly. She gestured at her faded scales and thin frame. This is what happens when a Thyrani denies the Volthara. We waste away because our bodies believe we have been rejected by our chosen mate. And you thought I would reject you. Marcus said it was not a question. Why would you not? Sitha replied, I am not human. I am not even pleasant. And before the accident, I treated you with contempt because I was too arrogant to see your worth. She turned away from him, unable to bear the weight of his gaze. I have nothing to offer you except the burden of knowing that you accidentally bound yourself to an alien woman who does not deserve your kindness. Marcus was quiet for so long that Sitha began to think he had left. Then she felt warmth at her back. Not quite touching, but close enough to feel, can I ask you something? He said softly, yes. Do you want me to stay away? The question hung in the air between them. Sitha knew what she should say. Yes. Stay away. Find someone of her own species. Live your life free from this complication you never asked for. But she could not make the words come out. I do not know how to answer that, she whispered. Then let me tell you something, Marcus said. And she felt him move closer until his chest was almost touching her back. I have been cold my whole life, Sitha. Not in body, but in heart. She turned to face him and found him standing so close she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. I grew up on a colony ship where everyone was too busy surviving to form real connections. And I joined the consortium because I was looking for something I could not name. He reached out and gently took her trembling hands in his. I did not know what I was looking for until that night when I held you in the dark and told you stories about home. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. Sitha's heart was beating so hard, she was sure he could hear it. What are you saying? I am saying that maybe this Velthara of yours goes both ways, Marcus said with a small smile. I am saying that I have not stopped thinking about you since that night. And when you started avoiding me, it felt like the cold had crept back inside my chest. He lifted one of her hands and pressed it against his heart. I am saying that I do not know what this bond means for your people, but I know what it means for mine. It means I found someone worth holding on to, and I do not want to let go. Tears were flowing freely down Sitha's face now, but for the first time in weeks, they were not tears of despair. You cannot mean that, she said. You barely know me. Then let me know you, Marcus replied simply. Let me learn about your world and your culture and what makes you laugh. Let me bring you warm drinks and tell you stories until we have our own story to tell. He stepped closer and wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest, the same way he had that night in the frozen laboratory. Sitha melted into his warmth with a sob of relief. Thought I would have to spend the rest of my life cold, she whispered. Against his neck. Not anymore, Marcus promised. Not ever again. They stood there in the corridor holding each other while crew members walked past and pretended not to stare, and for the first time since the accident, Sitha felt truly warm. 6 months had passed since the night Marcus held Sitha in the corridor and promised to never let her feel cold again. He had kept that promise, their quarters on station. Vela 9 had become a small paradise of warmth and comfort. Filled with blankets and heated cushions and a special sleeping pod they had designed together that kept the temperature perfect for both of them. Sitha's scales had regained their brilliant shine, the golden color around her eyes glowing brighter than ever before. She smiled more now, laughed more, and the sharp edges of her personality had softened into something that was still fierce, but also impossibly tender. The station crew had grown used to seeing them together, the human technician and the Thyrany scientist walking side by side through the corridors with their hands intertwined. Some had been surprised at first. Some had whispered and wondered, but eventually everyone simply accepted it as part of life on Vela 9. Marcus and Sitha had become inseparable, working on joint research projects during the day and spending their evenings tangled together watching the stars. It was the happiest Sitha had ever been. And then her clan mother arrived. The delegation from Thyron Prime appeared without warning, their sleek diplomatic vessel docking at the station on what was supposed to be a routine inspection. Torsitha knew better the moment she saw the passenger manifest Velathra. Valkyrie was not the type to waste her time on routine inspection. She was the matriarch of one of the oldest and most respected clans on the homeworld, a woman whose word could shape the future of their entire species. She was also Sitha's mother, and she had come to reclaim her daughter. "You have brought shame upon our family," Valcathra said when they met in the diplomatic reception room, her voice cold as the void between galaxies that stood her ground, even though every instinct told her to bow her head in submission. "I have brought nothing but honor," she replied. "My research here has advanced our understanding of xenobiology by years, and I have found happiness besides." "Happiness?" Valcathra's Izian eyes narrowed with disgust. "You call this entanglement with a human happiness? Word has reached home of your bond, daughter, and the council is not pleased." "The council can think what they wish," Sitha said, surprising herself with her own boldness. "The Velthara chose Marcus for me, and I will not deny what the ancestors have given." "The ancestors did not give you this aberration," her mother hissed. "Your body malfunctioned in a moment of crisis and attached itself to the first warm body it could find. This is not sacred bonding. This is survival instinct gone wrong." "You are mistaken." The voice came from the doorway, and both women turned to find Marcus standing there with quiet determination in his brown-gold eyes. He walked into the room with his shoulders straight and his head held high, showing no fear, even though he was facing one of the most powerful women on Tyrum Prime. "You must be the human," Valcathra said with disdain. "The one who has corrupted my daughter with your unnatural heat." "My name is Marcus Cole," he replied calmly, "and I have come to speak the words of intention." Sitha's heart stopped. Words of intention were an ancient Thyrani custom, spoken by one who wished to claim formal responsibility for a bonded partner. They were words that carried the weight of centuries, words that bound two people together in the eyes of family and law and the ancestors themselves. Marcus could not possibly know them, but he did. He turned to face Valcathra and spoke in halting but clear Thyrani, his accent rough but his meaning unmistakable. "I stand before the keeper of blood and honor. I who have shared warmth in the darkness. I who have held your daughter against the cold and felt her heart beat in time with mine." Sitha's eyes filled with tears as she realized what he had done, all those evenings, when she thought he was reading human entertainment on his datapad. He had been learning her language instead. I claim the bond that the night has given us, Marcus continued. I offer my fire to warm her scales and my strength to guard her rest. I offer my heart to beat beside hers until the stars grow cold. He took a breath and finished with the final phrase, the one that sealed the intention beyond any doubt. I am her son. If she will have me. The silence in the room was absolute. Avelsra stared at the human with an expression that shifted from shock to confusion to something that might almost have been respect. You learned our sacred words, she said slowly. You learned our language just to speak them. Your daughter is worth learning everything, Marcus replied in standard. And I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of what the ancestors have given us. Velcathra turned to Sitha. Is this truly what you want? She asked, and for the first time there was something other than disapproval in her voice. This human, this outsider, to be your bondmate until death? Sitha walked to Marcus and took his hand in hers. He carried fire inside him when my world was cold and dark, she said. He helped me when anyone else would have let me freeze. He learned our language and our customs and our sacred words because he wanted to honor what we have. So yes, mother. This is truly what I want. Velcathra was silent for a very long time. Finally, she let out a breath that seemed to carry years of rigid tradition with it. The ancestors speak in strange ways, she said. And perhaps there is wisdom in their choice that I cannot see. She looked at Marcus with eyes that still held skepticism, but also a grudging acceptance. You carry fire inside you, human, and you have used it to save what is precious to me. So perhaps that is enough. She turned and walked toward the door, pausing only to look back at her daughter. The clan will not celebrate this union, she warned. But they will not oppose it either. You have chosen your path, Sitha. Now walk it with courage. Then she was gone, and Marcus and Sitha were alone. Sitha threw herself into his arms and held him so tightly she thought she might break him. You learned the words of intention, she said through her tears. You learned my language. I wanted to do this right, Marcus said, pressing his forehead against hers. I wanted your family to know that this is not an accident or a malfunction. This is me choosing you, the way your people choose each other. He pulled back to look into her golden eyes. I love you, Sitha. I have loved you since that night in the dark when you trusted me to keep you warm. And I love you, she replied. My impossible, wonderful, burning son of a human. That night they lay together in their sleeping pod. Sitha curled against Marcus's chest with her scales warm and gleaming in the dim light. My people once worshipped the sun because it gave us life, she murmured against his skin. I think I understand why now, because it was warm? Marcus asked with a smile in his voice. Because it was constant, Sitha replied. Because it rose every day without fail and chased away the cold and the dark. Because it asked for nothing in return except to shine on those who needed its light. She lifted her head to look at him. Humans are like that, I think. You shine without even realizing how rare your warmth truly is. Marcus laughed softly and pulled her closer. We are not that special, he said. Sitha pressed her forehead to his chest and listened to the steady, constant beat of his heart, the heart that had chosen her, that had learned her language and spoken her sacred words and promised to be her son until the stars grew cold. Yes, she whispered with absolute certainty. You are, and wrapped in the warmth of the human who had saved her. The human who had chosen her, the human who had become her whole universe. Sitha finally understood what it meant to never be cold again.